Peace and welcome to the Atlantis School for Gifted Youngsters. Thanks for watching and subscribing to our channel. So when you look at ancient Kemetic astrology, which is different than a Hellenistic astrology, the Kemetic perspective emphasizes temperament based upon the 4 different elements. So fire is hot and dry. And those signs which are considered fire signs, that is the corresponding temperament. Now again, just because you're born under a certain sign, it does not automatically mean that that is your temperament. Because again, planetary influences have to be taken into consideration with our planetary influences in terms of social economics, geographic location, era, all of these various different influences. So you can be born under the sign of so-called Leo, but your temperament is not hot and dry. You may have a totally different temperament. So it's important to keep that in mind as well. In ancient Kemet, that's how they assessed people. They first assessed them according to their temperament, which is based upon those 4 different elements. But all of us have a dominant temperament. When adepts went through the mystery schools of ancient Kemet, one of the things that they were learning was homeostasis, or bringing balance to those various different temperaments or elements. So one of the things that you also may learn in different societies is alchemy was a process of ultimately manifesting the 5th element. So the 5th element, it oftentimes corresponds to what they call gold or ether, which is a composite of the 4 elements or the 4 temperaments. Most people, as incarnated consciousness in this form, they may just have a leaning towards a certain temperament and see that as their fixed destiny or way that they express themselves. So if they hot and dry, they're going to tell you that's just how I am. And they're not able to operate outside of that temperament at all. Which means that ultimately they're going to burn a lot of bridges and they're going to burn themselves up if they don't learn to bring some balance or homeostasis to express themselves according to the other different temperaments. Because it's a limitation to be hot and dry all the time. Or if you get 2 hot and dry people in a relationship, oh, they're going to burn each other up. And they probably going to have some real hot, hard sex too. Sometimes being forthright like that is a good thing, but you shouldn't be like that all the time. And that's one of the problems with some people. Their temperament, they look at it as fixed. But the process of alchemy is being able to take these baser metals or these baser elements or these baser temperaments that are limits, to fuse them and transmutate them into something that's higher. So alchemy means the chemistry. This stuff I'm talking about right now is just chemistry. Alchemy is the chemistry. But it's challenging sometimes. You know, you may know people who are cold and moist. They're very emotional. They don't like conflict, or they don't, they're very passive in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? And they may let somebody hot and dry just run over them. because cold and moist, they may not be very assertive like that. And if you talk to them about, yo, you need to tell them about that. You need to step up and do this. Oh, okay. They really ain't gonna do it because they look at themselves. That's just how they are. All of these things are limitations. All of these things are limitations. So in ancient Kemetic society, a part of that mystery school was to teach people how to bring balance and homeostasis to recognizing not only just various different sciences of life, but these various different temperaments and necessity for being able to express yourself based upon what the situation demands. So even when you look at, like I talked about with the Asiatic calendar, the stellar calendar, the 25,000 year cycle, and how the sun visits a house every 2,160 years, this process that was taught in ancient Kemet was also teaching people how to be comfortable in different houses. How to learn to express yourself based upon what that situation demands, and not being limited to any of those different expressions. So you can see how once it got into the hands of the Europeans and was taught as Hellenistic astrology, that this idea that they had in terms of these limitations is something that has been perpetuated all the way down into today's society. So you hear people that's giving you an astrological reading talking about you a Pisces, and they only gonna tell you about that. That's just how you are. Or they gonna give you a horoscope reading just based on that. They're not gonna tell you like, yo, this is your dominant expression. It doesn't mean you don't express yourself in any other type of ways. If this is your dominant expression, when you come in contact with this particular person, place, and the thing, then that dominant expression needs to take a back seat, and you need to address it that way. You need to bring out some of this Aries energy. That's what's necessary. Right? So because of this Western perspective that some people have, you have a lot of people that may discount or may not look at the validity of ancient practices that we've had in different societies that gave us a deeper insight into not just constellations in terms of planetary bodies, but also constellations in terms of terrestrial bodies. So when you're talking about like astrology or any of these other type of things, you're talking about celestial bodies. I'm talking about the correspondence of the celestial with the terrestrial. Just like in that born degree, it says planets is something that's been grown and made from the beginning. The physical form is a planet. So as the earth or as the woman, all of this is happening not only through you and around you, but on you. So it's good to be able to take time to study some of these various different perspectives and things. And it's not to say that, you know, you should become an astrologer or something like that. And it'd be cool if you're doing it from an ancient perspective, though, you know? But being able to show people that at the end of the day, your destiny is ultimately in your hands. You have various different influences going on, right? But it would be wrong as an astrologer to just tell people about planetary influences and you're not telling people also about other kind of influences that's going on. You know what I mean? Like, think about this. You may see a Caucasian astrologer giving somebody a reading, a black person, a reading, and they ain't saying shit about racism. Like, come on now. That's very influential in that reading. Like, goddamn, you gonna tell me about this and you ain't gonna tell me about this that's going on right here, you know? So it has to be relevant and And that is one reason why some people just disconnect from it, because it's not relevant. It's like, you telling me all about this going on, swirling up here and all this other stuff, but yo, you ain't telling me about like the effects of certain foods on my physical form, or you ain't telling me about how certain legislation affects our families and communities where we live. Like, that shit is influential, you know? All of that is influential. But I think some people use that as a form of escapism, right? And instead of them just going to confessional at the Catholic Church, or going to a meeting with their pastor or whatever, you know, they just go see an astrologer or something, so that somebody can tell them a lot of times what you already know. Shit, you just looking for confirmation. So the goal is to really empower people so that they have the capacity to confirm things for themselves. Not to be in a position where you're striving to utilize this and make it seem like in order for them to have insight into life, they got to constantly come to you. That's bullshit. You should be able to teach people like, yo, this is how you read life yourself. If you're reading tarot cards and stuff like that, yo, teach a person how to read for themselves. That's all they doing. They going to you as a mirror. That's what it is, you know? So all of these things that I'm sharing with y'all, typically when you come in contact with a 5%er, they're not going to go into some of these things, because again, when we're talking about the science of everything in life, they may not see the science or the scientific basis of how planets are influential with other different planets within this entire solar system. Even though a lot of that is just sitting right there in our lessons, you know, it tells you planets is something that's been grown and made from the beginning. Okay. And then it tells you about our 25,000 year calendar. Okay. And it tells you about all of these other things that are insight into the influential nature of not only the planets, but also their effects on the earth. But if the connection is not made, if a person can't see the science in it, like, well, how the hell do Mercury influence us down here? What does Mercury retrograde mean? If you can't explain that to somebody, they just gonna look at it as not valid or it's not important. Just like when I went into the actual facts, and one of the things that I told you is, not only do these facts correspond to our planet Earth, but all of these facts are based upon what you can count, measure, and weigh. It's within the parameters of mathematics and science. So if you can count, measure, and weigh it, it exists. If you can't count, measure, and weigh it, then it don't exist. So the key is being able to show the relationship of the immaterial to the material. Like I said, you can't grab the wind, but you can measure it based upon its effect upon the physical world, its effect on the tangible, but you can't see it. Wind is not the only force of nature that is undetected by the naked eye. When you go back into the Bill degree, we talked about the water cycle, right? So you look at the Bill degree, the 8th degree, and the one of 40s, where it explains the water cycle. It says the sun draws its water up into the earth's rotation, which is called gravitation, in a fine mist which the naked eye can hardly detect. So that's a force of nature. You can't detect it with the naked eye, but you can see its effect on the material world, because that evaporation becomes condensation and then precipitation. So it goes from a gas to a liquid to a solid. As a being, we are gas, liquid, and solid. right? So any of these sciences of life, the key is being able to figure out how does this actually affect the material world. And unfortunately, a lot of times when you hear people talking about metaphysics or astrology or any of these other different systems, they're not clear on articulating how the immaterial affects the material reality. And when that is a disconnection, then people throw it away and they don't see it as a science of life. Which is unfortunate because it doesn't invalidate what a person's saying. They may just not have the way of articulating it. So you see people talking about metaphysics, you see them talking about astrology or some of these other different things, and they constantly talk about energy. They say, you know, you can feel energies and energies and energies, and that is just as ambiguous and broad as spirit. And love. That's pretty ambiguous too. You got to be specific with people, like what you mean by love. You know what I'm saying? Or what do you mean by spirit? It's very ambiguous. It's very broad. It's not specific. Energy is in the same category. So when you hear people, well, the energy's affected this and that is their energy. It's like, well, you know, like, well, what do you mean? Like, where did the energy come from? Could you describe it? And if a person's capable of doing that, then people may be more receptive to what it is they're saying. Because if not, they just gonna throw it right in the same category with other religions and other belief systems because you just talking.